30 yards from the windmill, a small body crawled on hands and knees and left a pale scrape through the alkali. The sun hammered straight down, the pump rod knocked the sky in a slow count, and the air smelled of hot iron and dry sage. Caleb Mercer saw the child first, and then saw the empty gourd tied to his waist with a frayed thong. The rifle in the doorway leaned muzzle down and stayed there, while Caleb crossed the yard with a bucket that sloshed against his leg like a beating heart. He went to one knee and tipped a tin cup. Not too fast. The boy's lips were split white and stuck to his teeth. The first swallow vanished like it fell through him. The second found a throat. The third woke his eyes. A salt cut shone at his hairline, and flies worried it until Caleb brushed them off with his hat. Then he lifted the boy easy and carried him into the shade under the porch rail. A breath of wind pushed dust under the steps, and the boy flinched at it. Caleb said, quiet, "Drink slow. You are safe on my dirt now." He said it like an oath, and felt it settle on his shoulders. Evelyn Kane came from the cool of the pantry with a bowl and a stray wisp of flour on her cheek. She had a ledger brain and hands that made a house hold together. She dipped a rag. She cleaned the cut. She said, "Eat when your mouth can chew and not before." She looked at Caleb, and the look said, "You just chose." The look said, "We will carry it together." The child blinked and touched the tin cup with both hands like it might run away. He tried one word and it broke. Comanche for sister or water or both. Evelyn answered with the only word that mattered, more, and gave him a new mouthful. Dawn came and the world put steel around the ranch. 150 silhouettes cut the sky on every ridge from the blue brushes in the east to the basalt teeth in the west. Riders sat horses hip-shot and waiting. No powder spoke. No one moved without a reason. The circle was wide enough to be mercy and tight enough to make men honest. Caleb and Evelyn stood in the yard with the boy between them and watched a dun mare walk out of the east line with a woman on her back who rode balanced and slow and steady like the ground was hers. She wore a coat taken from a trader and beads at her throat that made the sun walk. A bow case hung behind her knee. A carbine rested across her lap with the muzzle asleep. She reined in 20 paces from the gate and offered English like clean water. "I speak as Grey Wind," she said. "The boy belongs to my sister's house. He went looking for goats and found Heat, who gave him your water." Caleb said, "I did, and I will again." Grey Wind's eyes found Evelyn, and then the boy, and then the windmill. She said, "You know what this invites?" Caleb said, "I do, and I would rather endure watchful men than endure the sound of a child dying near a working pump." She nodded once, not agreement, recognition. Before the circle could breathe, 3 men came up the south road with a deputy and a paper book. Dust around their wagons hung mean. Deputy Rowe rode big to make up for the badge. He called out with the tone of a man speaking to himself, "Mercer, you hand that child to me and I take him to the fort and we all go to supper on time. You keep him, and you call a storm you cannot ride out. You owe the county your obedience," Caleb said. "I owe the living a drink." Rowe laughed like a hinge. Keating, the banker beside him, did not laugh. Keating ran his thumb down a page like a knife and said, "I see your note for $180 due in November. Neighbors watch who a man stands with in summer when the grass is short. If you make the wrong music today, my pen will not dance for you in fall." Grey Wind turned her mare enough to measure them and said, "Deputy, if you come 3 steps closer with your gun high, the first noise on this land will be your horse falling. Choose the step you want to be remembered for." Rosemount Crow hopped. Rowe sat down, his pride. He liked living. He pulled back a pace and bared his teeth like it was a smile. The boy under the porch peered at the rider and the badge, and then hid his face in Evelyn's apron and trembled in a way that begged for quiet. Caleb moved where all eyes could take his measure. He showed both hands. He set the bucket by the gatepost, and he took an axe head from a stump and laid it in the dust edge on. He said it plain so the number would stick in every head. "I will stake $200 in cattle and next spring's cutting. If that buys these next 12 hours of peace, dawn, and dusk water under my eye. No rifles to the mouth, you have my word, and my herd as bond." He said it to Grey Wind and to Rowe in the same breath, so neither could pretend later. Grey Wind listened like an elder and deputy. Rowe listened like a gambler counting cards he could not see. Keating smelled leverage and leaned forward. Around them the ring breathed once. The riders did not shift. They had discipline like a steel rim on a wagon wheel. Grey Wind lifted her chin and let the quiet travel. She said, "We watch men who make promises. We do not break horses that have not bucked. We leave eyes on your ridges, and we bring elders when the light is right. We test without blood if men do not insist on blood." She rode back to the eastern ridge and sat her mare and waited. The first crack in the glass of courage came inside the kitchen, where fear can whisper without witnesses. The boy woke with a jerk at a door thump. Evelyn set the bowl aside and put her palm to his back. She said, "Do you know your mother's path?" He shook his head. She said, "Then my floor is your ground until we find it." He tried English. He breathed the word safe and made it into a question. She did not lie. She said, "Safer here than out there." He watched her mouth. He watched her hands. Hands tell truth faster than words. He stopped shaking enough to swallow bread softened in broth. By noon, another pole of power rolled in. 4 army troopers with a lieutenant who wore a brim too big for his brow and a letter in his pocket that weighed more than him. They halted at the fence because men on good horses on every ridge will teach a lieutenant to respect fences. He read in a voice filled with ink. The fort requires the surrender of any Indian miner found on settled land and forbids armed gatherings within a mile of habitation. Grey Wind answered without heat. "Your mile is long today," Caleb said, "Lieutenant. Does that paper name water as a crime? If not, you may post it on my barn, and we will all pretend it helps." The young officer's horse stamped. The animal taught him to think before he spoke again. The circle held like rope in a steady wind. Men on both sides measured each other by who moved first to anger. Evelyn stood on the porch with a coffee cup cooling in her fingers. The boy under the table counted her breath and matched it. Keating leaned in his wagon and pretended to look for a pen, while he looked for a fire. Rowe weighed his chance at spectacle. Grey Wind lifted her hand once and 4 riders left the ring and came down calm as dusk. They brought shade for elders who would not hurry, and a wooden bowl that had been sanded smooth by years. They set it near the pump and stepped back. It was not a demand, it was an answer ready if men were smart enough to ask the right question. Caleb walked to the bowl. He looked at Grey Wind. He looked at Rowe. He bent and filled it by dipping the tin cup so no one could pretend who took what. He set it on the edge of the trough and stood back with his hands open. Grey Wind said, "Our children and women drink first at dawn and at dusk. Our men drink after the sun sets. If rifles come up, they lose their turn. If you keep that rule, we keep our rule, and no hooves touch your hay." Deputy Rowe laughed thin. He said, "I do not deal with savages." Keating touched his sleeve like a man warning a friend off a cliff. He said, "Rowe, this yard holds a lot of eyes with long memories. They called council at the cottonwood when the sun leaned. Grey Wind came down with 3 elders and 2 young spears who were hungry for a simpler answer. Caleb and Evelyn stood with them, and on the other side stood Rowe and Keating and the lieutenant with his paper. The breeze worked the leaves like 1,000 small coins. An elder with a rawhide wrap around his wrist spoke soft, and Grey Wind put his words into English without taking the weight out. "The boy was lost. Water should be given to the lost. This seems older than your paper. Do you claim the right to make old laws, young men, again?" Rowe said. "I claim the right to not be surrounded on a white man's land." The elder cocked his head. He said, "Your world is smaller than mine. If you think the ground changes under your boots when you say the word white." Keating cut in, "I claim the right to be paid." And he smiled like a dry gate. Evelyn held up the ledger, and the neat rows looked like fence boards and laws. She said, "The note is current, and the fence line was fixed in April by this man's back, and not the bank's generosity. If you make money, your God, at least be honest about your church." The lieutenant tried authority again, and could almost hear it flake off. He lowered the paper and looked at the child and the bowl and the ring and found a better posture. He said, "If there is a set of terms both sides sign, I can put it in my report, and the fort might honor it. When the wind changes, soldiers respect anything that looks like work." Grey Wind's mouth tipped a hair. She said, "Then watch us work." A knife went into the fire until the tip glowed. Grey Wind drew out a small length of cedar and carved a notch near one end and another near the other. She handed the stick to Caleb and to the eldest man and said, "1 notch for dawn, 1 for dusk. We cut a mark at each water hour and no one drinks outside it. If we keep the marks on this stick for 10 days, the circle breaks and we watch by cloud instead of by horse." Evelyn said, And when Rose says this is witchwork, we show him how numbers keep heat off men better than anger. She held up a piece of Caleb's branding iron, the small P and bar. She pressed it into the cedar between the notches. She said, "I want something on this that the county understands." Keating frowned at a world that was not simple enough to crush. If you were standing where Caleb stood now with the deputy on one side and 150 riders on the ridges, would you break the stick or carry it? And if this kind of line tightens your chest, saddle up with us, subscribe. Ride the next hard mile and hear how men and women bend the West without breaking. They hung the stick by a rawhide loop on a peg pounded into the pump post. Greywind tied a thin strip of blue cloth above it like a small sky. Rose scowled but did not cut it down. Not with that many eyes on him. Keating counted 10 quiet profits and 5 loud fines, and could not decide which he loved more. The circle thinned at evening to 2 riders on a ridge in each quarter, and they sat with their rifles flat and their backs easy. Greywind camped east with the elders. Caleb watched the west line and fixed his gait for the 3rd time that week, because fixing a gait is what a man does when his mind wants to spiral. The first night a pair of drifters with loose morals and tight belts saw a house watched and thought easy fruit. They rode into the yard near dusk, when the light blinds, and reached for the boy and for the stick like boys reaching for plums. Caleb's shotgun came up and kissed the dirt to their right and spat a fan of gravel that cut no man. Greywind's bow hummed and her arrow shaved a button off a thief's coat and pinned it to the fence rail like a sermon nailed to a door. The drifters found humility and old speed and left. Deputy Rowe sat his horse at the edge of the yard and called that a breach of peace, and Greywind said you have a strange dictionary if you call a warning a war. Evelyn gathered the boy to her, and her heart took its time letting go. Pressure from his own side stepped harder the next morning. A wagon of neighbors and a preacher came with Rowe again, as if repetition can make wrongness right. The preacher's collar pinched his neck and his voice. He said, "You cannot serve 2 fires and expect not to burn." Keating looked at the notches on the stick and said, "Money doesn't like to share," Caleb said. "Neither does thirst," Evelyn said. "A ledger does not care whose hand writes the numbers, so long as the numbers hold." A woman with grey in her braid named Matilda Crane spoke from the back of the wagon. She said, "When I was a girl we took water from a Comanche bucket, when the creek went to rock and nobody died from the sharing." The preacher settled down. Memory had more weight than his book in the right wind. Greywind tested Caleb under the cottonwood with elders again at midday. She had him stand and speak his why. He told it simple so it would endure. "A boy was dying on my ground and the pump handle was under my hand. Greywind asked what when a man from town throws words at your door like stones. He said, I will give him coffee or work. Work is a good broom for ugly talk. A young warrior who hated the new listened to Caleb and wanted to hate him, and could not find a place to set the hate where it would not look foolish. The elders listened with quiet faces that make men want to straighten their shirts. They spoke among themselves, and Greywind watched Caleb while they did. She saw fatigue around his eyes and steadiness in his hands. "Both matter," she said to him soft, so the elders would not have to think she had grown weak. "You are making a bridge you may have to sleep under when it floods," he said. "Then I will learn to swim." Rowe pushed the noose on his voice tighter that night at the store porch when the town gathered. He said, "A traitor lives south behind a hedge of Indians, and women are baking bread for chieflets." Keating tried to turn the room with a neat sum for future loss and got only the sound of boots. Matilda said, "My well is 3 feet from sand, and Mercer's is 30 down and sweet. If I hated him, I would still drink his water on a bad day." The room shifted because women who fetch water know the shape of justice, and men who listen to them live longer. Rowe spat and missed. He told 2 men to ride with him, and they did, because night makes fools brave. They came late. They found the yard sleeping. They reached for the stick, and a hand closed on Rowe's wrist. Evelyn's hand, her fingers like iron under skin. She said, "We make marks here and pay for them with work. You don't get to cut what you didn't build." Rowe yanked back, and his pride wanted a shot. Greywind's whistle cut the yard like a hawk cry, and men on the ridges sat up. Caleb stepped between Rowe and the pump and lifted his palm. His shotgun pointed to soil. He said, "Deputy, go home. If you want to hang a man, do it noon with your hat on and your reasons straight. Do not steal peace in the dark." Rowe found he did not want to be the first man to try the circle, and rode off with a curse that sounded tired, The watch held through 10 dawns and 10 dusks, and Greywind cut a notch at each, and Caleb did the same with his knife. The stick grew a memory any fool could read. Keating took down a sign about accounts due and put up a new one that offered loans for fence repair, and he pretended it was his own invention. Evelyn taught the boy to count using the notches and rocks, and he laughed when his mouth learned numbers in 2 tongues. The lieutenant came once more with kinder eyes and asked if he might record the agreement as a memorandum to keep himself from looking like a fool to his captain. Greywind nodded like an aunt and said, "You write it. We will keep doing it." When the elders were ready to close the circle, they did it in daylight where men do better. Greywind brought a small tin disc punched from a silver dollar. She had filed a groove through the middle and drilled 2 holes near the edge. She said, "This is not a treaty. It is a reminder." She handed half to Caleb and half to the oldest elder. She said, "When your half and ours hang together at a doorway, a woman with a bucket walks in and no one stops her. When a rider shows this half men on my side, expect him to have water manners. When a settler shows the other, he carries respect like weight. The halves only fit if no one bends them." Keating looked at the coin like it was a blasphemy and a profit both. Evelyn smiled at the simple geometry of trust. Cost walked in as soon as the coin lay cool. A buyer from North cancelled on Caleb, because he did not want to be seen at a ranch with a Comanche charm on the post. Roe found a law from a box that fined Caleb $5 for harboring a child. Greywind's young hothead cut a fence out on the flats to make a point, and an elder cuffed him across the back of the neck and made a truer point. Evelyn lost an order for winter biscuits from a neighbor who went hungry 2 winters back and did not learn. The boy cried one night without knowing why, and Evelyn put her hand to his back and said hush until the world agreed and hushed. Spring came thin, and a storm hit the mesa and filled arroyos with angry brown water. A wagon from town rolled near the ford and started to slide. Roe was driving because pride makes men take bad trails. The wagon went sideways, and a wheel bit a hole and broke. The current took wood and took grain, and was going to take Roe. Greywind heard the cry and was first to the bank. She threw him a rope, and Caleb waded out waist deep with a pole to set it. Evelyn hauled on the line with the strength of a woman who splits wood every other day, and the boy planted his heels and leaned like a man. They brought the deputy ashore coughing up river and swallowed excuses. Greywind said, "Water keeps no grudges. Learn from it." Roe did not speak. He watched the tin half on Greywind's necklace press against her throat with her breathing, and he looked at Caleb's half on a leather thong around his wrist, and he learned something he could not put in a report. When grass stood high enough to whisper, Greywind asked Caleb and Evelyn to come to the flats for a council with more women than men. They spoke in a ring with babies at the edge and a fire low for coffee. Greywind's aunt with hair the colour of ash held the half-coin up and said in her own tongue, "This is a small thing that carried a large thing. A boy with new legs drinks, because 2 houses cut silver and did not cut each other. We do not call that peace. We call that work, and we keep doing it." Caleb said, "I can keep cutting fence posts and notches and coin if that is what keeps breath in children." Evelyn said, "And I will keep the ledger honest with both our names written in the corners, so no one can erase one without smearing the other." A few weeks later, men could ride the ridges without being part of a ring. 2 or 3 figures at a time moved like weather instead of like war. The fort sent fewer troopers and better ones. Keating took a small bag of silver from riders with a sense of humor and recorded it accurately after a look at Evelyn that told him he had a witness. Roe wore his badge with less noise, and his boots picked up dust instead of fights. The boy slept through a night and woke laughing at a chicken. Greywind came and went like a shadow that was welcome on hot days. She and Caleb learned the practical grammar of each other's work, how to hand off buckets, how to move a skittish horse past a flapping shirt, how to speak in looks the deputy could not find. The title's promise echoed when danger tried once more to rename the place. 3 hard men with a hunger for quick ease came at noon in July when the sky made sweat into salt. They reached for the half-coin and for the stick like taking those could unmake the choice under them. Caleb stood square, and his shotgun spoke to the dust near their boots. Evelyn held a kitchen knife in a way that made a wise man reconsider bread. Greywind drew her bow and set an arrow humming through the hat crown of the loudest fool. The lieutenant, who had learned the shape of this yard, put his horse between the men and the post and said, "Take your misfortune elsewhere with your hats on." Even Roe laughed at that because it was smart. The men left without dignity and without blood, and the half-coin shone like the sky took an interest. They put a final sign in iron under the coin halves, because some men need letters as well as marks. Evelyn hammered a plate cut from a stove back into the post and scratched with a nail. Dawn, water, dusk. Water 2 buckets, no guns at the mouth. Greywind traced the words with a fingertip like they might be a prayer. Caleb pressed his hand flat to the metal, and the heat from it went into his bones in a way he would remember when winters turned hard. The boy climbed onto the trough and laughed at his reflection, because nothing was chasing it. When cost and reward counted up honest, the ledger still did not balance neat. It never does. Caleb lost a supper table or two in town, and gained a table eternal in the yard under a sky that liked what it saw. Evelyn had to learn to nod and walk when some woman cut her dead at church. Greywind had to stare down a cousin who thought kindness was the same as weakness. The boy had to learn 2 sets of manners and keep both without tearing. Keating had to admit quietly that he had been wrong in the way cowards are wrong, and Roe had to live with a roof he knew had been saved by hands he once called enemy. They brought the story home on a day when the pump handle clicked slow and forgiving, and the wind came kinder. Greywen took off her half-coin and held it out to Caleb. She said, "You keep both until I come for water in winter. If they sit together too long, men might think they were always one. And that would be a good lie," Caleb said. "I will hang them where the sun takes them at noon so everyone sees what we chose and how we keep choosing it." Evelyn took the cedar stick with its notches and wrapped it in a strip of blue cloth and put it in the pantry with the flour where she keeps things that keep people alive. In the quiet that follows work, the meaning stood plain enough for anyone still listening. Courage had been a cup of water set in a small hand before permission. Mercy had been letting yourself be watched without rage until trust grew. Honor had been paying the price in neighbors and coins and sleep, without selling the right thing cheap. Peace had been the habit, built from notches and half-coins and tied rope. If this kind of frontier truth sits right with you, ride with us for another tale, subscribe. Keep a kettle on for the long nights. If you want to drop $1 in the hat, there is always a place by the fire for those who help keep the stories going. The West is wide and the next hard choice is already walking toward us. If you want to keep riding beside them, to sit at the edge of the fire and listen as more of these forgotten hearts speak, then subscribe and stay with us. There is another road ahead, another night, another choice lit only by a weak lamp and a strong will, and we'll be here to walk it together.